Opening credits. Barely over. Shapeshifter Ménage Billionaire Romance. By Selena Coffey. Auto-narrated using Google technology. Prologue. My body slowly began to wake up, but my thoughts were still sluggish. As I struggled to have enough willpower to open my eyes, I attempted to move my hands, only to realize that they were tied behind my back, secured in place on the chair where I sat. I realized that my feet were also tied together. Clearly, he had made sure that I had no means of escape. I managed to finally open my eyes, and the movement was painful as I slowly raised my head. My breathing was uneven, and blood dripped down my face, partially preventing me from seeing out of one eye. My whole body was in pain, but the pain was only secondary to the rage I felt. I wasn't going to die like this. By his hands. That wasn't going to be my ending. I wouldn't give him the pleasure. As if reading my mind, he slapped me hard then, so hard that my head jolted back at the impact and I felt that my neck was going to snap at the force of the blow. My thoughts became discombobulated as I attempted to stay conscious through the pain. I didn't know how much longer I could take it. Nothing but pure hatred towards the man in front of me kept me alive. I wouldn't give him the pleasure of showing fear. And then I heard a howl in the very near distance, and this time as he raised his hand to slap me again, I smiled at him. Chapter 1. Hey Nia baby. Bring your sweet booty over here. I have something for you, sweet thing. The man trying to get my attention was a regular. He came in every night dressed in $10,000 suits, reeking of expensive cologne. He was probably a catch by most women's standards. I wasn't most women. I wasn't interested in a sugar daddy, and I figured that was the only thing he had to offer. When I'd first met him, I immediately disliked him. His sense of entitlement and arrogance had been instantly off-putting. I heard he worked on Wall Street, and he liked to throw money around. He had pretty much made his way through most of the waitresses and dancers who worked here. He made my skin crawl. I could see from the corner of my eye that he was waving money at me, as if I were a dog that would just come running at the sign of a treat. I ignored him and continued to scrub the bar. It was after closing hours, and all the patrons were supposed to have vacated the premises by now, but unfortunately the guy currently yelling at me didn't get the memo. I felt sick as I scrubbed away at the grime and God knows what else that had accumulated there over the course of the night. I was just glad I didn't have to do the floors. They were probably covered with body fluids galore, I thought sourly to myself, feeling like crap warmed over. I was fighting a hangover that seemed to be never ending, and I wanted nothing more than to just go home and sleep it off. I was a lightweight, but you wouldn't know it from how much I'd been drinking lately. Funny how binge drinking had never been a habit of mine during college, but for the past 3 months it was pretty much my only habit. I ignored the headache that made me feel as if I had been run over by an 18-wheeler, and tried to focus on cleaning the remaining section of the bar. My whole body hurt, and I just wanted to take a nap right then and there, standing up even if my boss would have allowed it. It was a struggle. I desperately wanted to just pause for a moment and close my eyes. Not that closing my eyes gave me any peace. Instead of nightmares about monsters, I struggled with dreams of Hollis and Winslow. I always dreamed that I went back to them, back to my old life, but that wasn't possible. I knew too much, I had seen too much. This was my life now. This bar, this job. I told myself that it was better than the alternative, trying to build a life with 2 men who weren't even men at all. I had been so deep in thought that I hadn't even heard the annoying guy get up until he was right next to me, leaning against the bar with his elbows bearing his weight. He looked squirrely, like a washed-up politician trying to make a comeback. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. He was a creep, and we both knew it. He gave me an oily smile. You didn't hear me calling you earlier? I wanted to give you a tip. I made my way around the bar to distance myself from him. The bar's closed, sir. I'm sorry, I said, pretending that I hadn't heard his earlier comment. Sweetie, he said, leaning towards me, You feel like getting a few drinks with me outside of this fine establishment?" My face grew tight and I didn't make eye contact as I said, "I'm sorry, but I don't date our customers." He laughed humorlessly. "Who said anything about a date? I was just talking about a few drinks, and then maybe we could go back to my place to get a little bit better acquainted." I have a boyfriend," I lied. "Bring him along," the guy said with a smirk, "the more the merrier." I knew he was baiting me, trying to shock me, but it wasn't going to work. I had fallen in love with two men who were part bear, or some other were-creature. Not much could shock me now. "I don't think he would be into that, but thanks for the invite," I said smoothly, turning my back to him. "Can I get you to reconsider?" He called to me, and I shook my head without turning around. "You're a loss," he said bitterly, and I waited for the sound of his footsteps signaling that he had walked away before turning around. I turned around to look behind me subtly to ensure he wasn't there. I gave a sigh of relief and finished cleaning up the bar. I had been filling in for the bartender for at least a week and a half. She had left on maternity leave, and given that I was sure the bar didn't have a family leave policy, I figured she would be back sooner rather than later, since she wasn't earning a paycheck. It was an easy job that paid the bills. Until I figured out what my next step would be, I was pretty much just living life one day at a time, albeit sometimes in a fog, courtesy of drinking way too much. I knew I was self-medicating. I was drinking to forget. But frankly, it wasn't working. When I was finally done, I gathered my things and made my way towards the door. "Have a good night, Nia," my boss called to me as he appeared in the hall. I smiled wanly and waved goodnight. Nia. I had changed everything about myself to become someone else. I had even changed my name. No one knew me here by Ivy. As far as I was concerned, Ivy was gone. I wore colored contacts and dyed my hair a rich burgundy. I changed the way I dressed, sticking with dark clothes and sneakers. I looked like a harder version of myself, and I noticed people readily gave me my space. While Ivy had been a people-pleaser who was bright-eyed and innocent, Nia was antisocial and jaded. I was only a few blocks away from my apartment, in a crappy part of Newark, New Jersey. I had moved there figuring a change of state would mean maybe the guys wouldn't try too hard to find me. I honestly didn't know if they tried or not, but I didn't plan to make it easy for them if they were so inclined to look for me. I figured Hollis was probably
censored,
that he couldn't find me, and I smiled to myself thinking about how easy it was to ignite his anger, among other things. God, how I missed him. But my smile slowly disappeared as I heard a noise behind me. They were almost imperceptible, the faint sound of footsteps as they kept pace with mine. My heartbeat instantly picked up, and I began to walk faster. I was scared. It was late, and the city was tough. As my steps quickened, so did the steps of whoever was behind me. I tried to not panic. I forced myself to look around and be more aware of my surroundings. I saw a door suddenly open less than 10 feet away from me, and several men walked out laughing. I didn't need to think. I dashed for the door, almost plummeting into the men who were just trying to exit. "Slow your roll, sweetheart," one laughed as I plowed into him and he righted me. I pulled away from his grasp, and he looked at me strangely. "You okay?" I turned to look behind me then, and saw no one. I knew I wasn't going crazy. Someone had been following me, but I didn't know who. And I wasn't going to risk walking home by myself now. "I'm okay. Thanks, I've got to go," I mumbled, walking away from the confused man who just shrugged and continued talking with his friends. I turned to walk further into what I discovered was a club. It was dark, very dimly lit, and everyone seemed to be standing around some sort of stage. No one paid attention to me as I made my way past the crowd of mostly men. I noticed briefly that there didn't seem to be one woman in the crowd. And just as I thought that, the curtains parted on stage and music sounded across the room. I knew it was a song by Beyoncé, but I couldn't tell which one. Apparently all the men knew it, as they began to cheer and jump up and down in excitement. And that's when I saw her, covered in whipped cream. Well, actually, she was actually a he. She sashayed out to the center of the stage, and the DJ announced over the microphone from his station above the platform, "And the moment you all have been waiting for, the luscious and oh-so-lovely honey petals." Roars and applause again echoed across the room as strobe lights appeared, and the DJ cranked it to high gear. Apparently, this was a drag queen show. I couldn't help but stare at the whipped cream that covered her pubic area, and
Censored.
And then when she turned around and shook her
Censored.
at the crowd, I noticed that the whipped cream went straight up her crack and around her narrow hips. She had pretty much created a whipped cream thong. I honestly was captivated by the show in front of me. Two men wearing skin-tight leotards danced on either side of her, shaking their behinds and wiggling parts that I didn't even know men could wiggle. For a second I was so enthralled by what was going on there, I forgot that I was looking for a place to call a cab. I got my head together and found my way past the screaming crowd and made my way to the bathroom. I barricaded myself in a stall, reached for my cell phone and was about to call a taxi when I noticed that not only didn't I have any service, but my phone was dying. It charged off before I could even dial a number. I sighed and placed my head up against the wall of the stall. I wanted to cry. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have any friends. No family. And I was scared. I didn't want to go home alone. I felt tears springing up and wiped away at them impatiently. I forced myself to think rationally. Come on, Ivy, think. Think. You're in a bar. There are plenty of people with phones, just ask one of them. I took a deep breath and told myself that everything would be fine. Pushing the door open, I attempted to walk out when someone pushed back on the door, knocking me back into the stall with such force that I couldn't even take a breath. He or she literally knocked the breath out of me, and I hit my head as I stumbled back, not able to brace myself as I went falling to the floor. My head smacked against something hard and I think I screamed, I couldn't be too sure, before I slumped to the floor unconscious. Chapter 2. Oh my GAAAWWWDDD. She's dead. She's dead. I heard a voice screaming. Shut up, Nico, said another voice as I struggled to open my eyes. I winced as I did, taking in the room around me that seemed to be decorated by a genie. I felt like I was in Disney's Aladdin. Purple fabric lined the walls and there were clothes everywhere, and then I noticed the vanity covered with wigs and boas. Yes, girl. It's a mess. Don't I know it, said the voice, and this time I was able to focus on the face of the person speaking. I recognized her instantly. It was the drag queen from earlier, and I looked away and blushed as she towered over me wearing nothing but the whipped cream, which was slowly starting to melt off in key places. She's blushing. Maybe the blood's rushing straight to her head. Do you think it means she has a concussion? I recognized his voice as the DJ from earlier. He was a scrawny man with a squeaky voice that seemed to get higher when he was upset. Damn, Nico. Calm down before I give you a concussion, the drag queen said, placing a hand on her hip and rolling her eyes. I attempted to sit up, not wanting to be a part of the catfight that seemed about to start. I winced as I tried, and the drag queen snapped her fingers. The scrawny DJ guy, who I guess was called Nico, reached behind him and grabbed a robe from the pile of clothes and handed it to the drag queen. She slid it on and said, There. Now you don't have to worry about your modesty being offended. I couldn't help but blush again and said with a shaky voice, Where am I? And what happened? Some dude, definitely not a regular. I know the regulars, they always tip well among other things, started Nico. Nico was going into the bathroom when he saw some guy slam the door into your face. The drag queen summed up. Someone did this on purpose? I said in disbelief. Oh yeah, honey, and he would have done a whole lot more if I hadn't shown up, Nico said smugly. I started attacking him with my shoe. Good thing I wore stiletto heels today. They're custom made. Check them out. I stared down at his shoes that resembled ruby slippers. They're very nice, thank you for stopping that guy from doing any more damage, I said shyly. For some reason I felt like crying. He nodded happily and said, I might be a scarecrow, but I took 10 years of karate. Daddy insisted to toughen me up. He giggled, not that it worked. Anyway, he said, exaggerating the word, who was that dude? An ex-boyfriend? Ex-husband? I shrugged, and even that motion hurt. I shook my head. I honestly didn't see who hit me. Was it a guy wearing a suit, who seemed to be imitating the Wolf of Wall Street? Nico snickered. Yeah, that's a pretty accurate description. He can't punch to save his life. He took off running after I hit him with my shoe a couple of times. So you do know who attacked you? The drag queen said, getting back to the point. I nodded, I think I do. I had a feeling he was following me, that's why I came in here. I'm sorry. I didn't get your name? Honey. Honey Petals. I own this club, Honeycomb. I reached out and shook her well-manicured hand. I'm Ivy, you're Nia. Nia. Honey looked at me and narrowed her eyes. She placed a hand on my head and said, you don't know if your name is Ivy or Nia? Maybe you do have a concussion. I pointedly changed the subject. I'm guessing this is your changing room, I said, looking around, avoiding her eyes and dislodging her hand from my forehead. Yeah, excuse the mess. I had a little bit of a tantrum earlier today, and might have made a mess of things. Nico scuffed, ha. Tantrum? It was World War Z up in here. Well, that's neither here nor there, Honey said sharply, making Nico immediately swallow his next statement. Want us to drive you home? I nodded gratefully, but then felt bad, as if I were imposing. Or you could just call me a cab. I don't want to cause you guys so much trouble. Both of you have done enough for me tonight. Girl, it's no problem. And I don't know too many taxis that would be willing to pick you up on this side of town so late at night. We're probably your best bet right now. I knew Honey was right. Nico reached out his hand and I took it, as he seemed to effortlessly help me up. Wow, he was strong for such a scrawny guy. Those years of karate had apparently paid off. As if reading my mind, he winked at me and said, I told you I was strong. But I'm not going to lie. Carrying you from the bathroom to here in these heels was not the best idea. I should have just kept them off. I'm probably going to have bunions in the morning. Honey laughed, you already have bunions, don't try to blame it on the shoes. Nico rolled his eyes and I bit back a smile. Honey noticed and smiled back, we're like an old married couple. Excuse us. Now let's get you out of here. Honey dropped the robe and wiped off the whipped cream. I looked elsewhere while she finished and she tossed on a dress and said, let's do this. A few minutes later, we were sitting in her SUV. It was a luxury car, and the leather on the seats were so comfortable. I found myself drifting off as soon as I gave her my address, which she programmed into her GPS. I slept soundly, probably because of exhaustion, when the sound of Nico whistling woke me up. Girl, I'm not trying to offend you, but what's a car like that doing in an area like this? Nico asked, pressing his nose against the window as if trying to get closer to whatever he was talking about. I sleepily looked in the direction of my apartment complex. All hints of sleepiness left as I realized whose car it had to be. After all, there wasn't another one like it. Winslow. I whispered, and as if he heard me, he opened the door of his car and stepped out. And then to my surprise, the passenger door opened and Hollis stepped out as well. He made his way around Winslow's car and came over and stood next to Winslow. Hollis stood there with his arms folded. He looked
censored.
And Winslow didn't look much happier. His stance was casual as he leaned against the car with his hands in his pocket, but I could tell his shoulders were tense, and he looked none too pleased. You know these guys? Honey asked. I would like to get to know them, Nico said with a little laugh. They're hot. Honey rolled her eyes and turned around to look at me, waiting for a response. I gulped hard. And it wasn't until that moment that I realized how much I missed them. Yeah, I know them. I sighed, knowing this was coming but not expecting it so soon. Thanks, honey, Nico. For everything. I reached for the door handle and opened it. As I climbed out, I thanked Honey and Nico again, delaying the inevitable. "Stay out of trouble, Ivy Nia," Honey called to me, as I walked towards the two men. "Unless trouble looks like those two," Nico said, gesturing towards the guys who still hadn't mumbled a word. "That type of trouble even I would want a piece of," he yelled out the window with a big smile on his face. I didn't acknowledge his parting words, my mind was too focused on this moment. "Friends of yours?" As expected, Hollis spoke first, referring to Honey and Nico. He didn't give me a chance to answer as he continued, "And who's Ivy Nia? Is that what you're calling yourself nowadays?" "Let's not do this here," Winslow said before I could respond. His voice was cold and he seemed upset. I wondered why. Hollis shrugged. "Whatever you say," he said sarcastically before swooping his arm out in an exaggerated motion and saying to me, "Lead the way, my lady." Stiffly, I did what I was told. I knew there was no use arguing with them, and I was curious as to what brought them to me in the middle of the night. They followed me up the stairs of my apartment. No one said a word, and the silence was disconcerting. I reached into the back pocket of my jeans and pulled out my key. I inserted it into the keyhole and pushed open the door. I ignored the stale smell of my apartment as I took a few steps across the carpet, which I was sure hadn't been replaced, at least since the early 80s, and turned on the light. It was pretty barren, I thought to myself as I thought of what my apartment must look like through their eyes. On the far right wall was a sofa that had been there when I arrived. In front of it was a coffee table with a glass top. There were no other pieces of furniture besides a lawn chair, which I had bought on a whim. I sat it next to the window and would sit there and drink sometimes. I was terribly embarrassed of that fact suddenly, and hoped no one would take a peek into my fridge to see all the other bottles I had there to drown my troubles away. Not that it had worked. After all, my troubles were right there standing in my living room, not looking happy. Hollis gave my apartment a cursory glance while Winslow slowly closed and then locked the door. He leaned against it and folded his arms as Hollis previously had. I sat down on my sofa with a sigh and placed my elbows on my knees. I folded my hands and waited for someone to speak. "So this is what you left us for?" Hollis said, looking around and stopping to lean against the counter. It was as if both of them were deliberately trying to avoid being near me. "Don't be insulting, Hollis," said Winslow lazily, even though I knew he agreed with Hollis. "I like the burgundy hair, Ivy." I blushed at his compliment. Hollis smirked. "I hate the hair. And lose the contacts. If it weren't for the fact that your smell is forever imprinted in my brain, I wouldn't have even recognized you. And what's up with the clothes? Are you goth now?" I felt anger bubbling to the surface. How dare he? He and Winslow were the ones who made my life tumultuous, and now he dared criticize me for trying to pick up the pieces? I was beyond angry suddenly. Have you always been this much of an a-hole, and I was just too blinded by
censored
this entire time to notice? Hollis looked taken aback, and Winslow laughed and started clapping. "Bravo, Ivy. It's about time someone put him in his place." "Hold your applause, Winslow, and kindly shut up," Hollis growled. Winslow stopped clapping but continued to smile. He winked at me, and my heart did a little jig. Hollis slowly approached me and sat down next to me. I moved over, not wanting to let him get too close. I was still angry with him for his comment earlier. "I'm sorry. I'm still a little sore about you leaving me." Winslow cleared his throat. "Leaving us?" Hollis corrected unconvincingly. "I like your burgundy hair too," he said, bringing up his hand to push my bangs out of my face. "I know you were going for the standoffish look, but to me you look like a fairy. A mature version of Tinker Bell," he said with a laugh. I looked at him and shook my head. "You haven't seen me for months and the best you can do is compare me to a Disney fairy? Maybe I should just shut up and let Winslow do all the talking," Hollis said with a sigh. "That's your best idea all night," Winslow responded matter-of-factly. He then opened his mouth to add something else, but he didn't get the chance as I cut him off. "Whatever you have to say, I don't think I want to hear it. I'm sorry, Ivy. But you don't have a choice. Chapter 3. I shivered at Winslow's words. They sounded ominous, and I wondered if anyone would come to my rescue if I screamed. As if reading my mind, Hollis said, "No one's going to hurt you. We just want to talk. And we want you to hear us out. The past few months have been difficult to say the least." I smiled humorlessly, thinking that I could relate, and all the bottles under my kitchen sink were proof of that. Winslow continued, "We're sorry that our presence has wreaked havoc in your life. When you wanted to leave us, we didn't expect it to be such a severe cutoff. When I found out you resigned from your internship, I had to. I was trying to break all ties. And we understand that, but we're sorry that breaking ties with us meant such a drastic change in your life." He sighed, and I recognized now that his tone was filled with guilt. My heart began to
censored.
Those were choices I felt I needed to make. Actions that I had to take. But that's just it, Hollis.
Censored.
You shouldn't have had to make those choices or take those actions. We've made a mess of your life, and we want to do whatever we can to make things better. I didn't know how to respond. I looked at Hollis' disparate-colored eyes and felt that familiar warmth began to spread across my body, flushing my cheeks and warming the space between my thighs. "I see something hasn't changed," he said, softly reaching up and gently rubbing my lower lip. I moved away abruptly. I stood up and walked away from him, pacing the small space of my living room. I stopped and turned away from them and folded my arms. "How did you find me?" "We've had eyes on you since we realized you left the city," Winslow answered. I turned towards them with my arms still folded across my
censored
and narrowed my eyes at them. "You've had someone following me?" "I guess that's what you could call it," Hollis said with a shrug. I wanted to hit him, but more than that, I wanted to sleep. The exhaustion hit me full force, and I leaned against my kitchen counter. "I can't. Ivy." I held up my hand, stilling Hollis' protest. "I can't have this conversation tonight. I'm beyond tired. I had a hard night. That's why we're here. You didn't get home around your expected time. We were worried." "You know what time I get home usually?" "Seriously?" I said indignantly. It was like I hadn't escaped from them at all. And I was angry that I had given up my life in New York, for nothing apparently. Even away from them, they had kept tabs on me. The change of hair color, the contacts, the different apartment, none of it had mattered. I felt so stupid for thinking I could make a few superficial changes, and my life would go back to normal. Who was I kidding anyway? Nothing about my current life was normal. I was drinking too much, hiding out from beasts and being rescued by drag queens. I wasn't in small-town Texas anymore. I felt defeated, and the exhaustion from earlier felt like a physical weight on my shoulders now, weighing me down. "Winslow, Hollis, I just can't deal with this right now. Just go away." "Ivy. Go. Get out." I found myself yelling. "Calm down," Winslow said. "We'll leave. Let's go, Hollis. Ivy needs her sleep." Hollis didn't look pleased as he stood up. Winslow walked towards me and surprised me by gently rubbing my arms and placing a
censored
on my forehead. "I've missed you," he whispered before abruptly letting go and walking out the door without another glance. I wanted to call to him. I wanted to tell him to stay. My heart yearned for him, and my body, even in its exhausted state, wanted to become one with his. My
censored
were erect just from his nearness, and I missed his warmth, that warmth that he had brought to me just by briefly stroking my arms.
This scene has been censored to provide a safe and enjoyable reading experience for everyone.
"We're not done yet, Ivy. Or do you prefer Nia now?" He didn't give me a chance to answer, as he too headed for the door. As he moved to close it, he looked back at me and his expression became gentle. His eyes seemed to glow in the darkness, almost in an eerie fashion as he said, "Sleep tight, my Ivy." And then with those words, he shut the door and was gone. With heavy legs, I walked to my door and locked it. I leaned against it for a second, trying to catch my breath. My heartbeat was still racing, and my breathing was shaky, and I was still aroused. I made my way to my bedroom and undressed slowly. All I could think about were Winslow's hands trailing a warm path up my arms, and how he smelled. So delicious. And then I thought about Hollis. He had a bad habit of arousing me to the point where I couldn't even think straight. Normally, I slept in undies and a t-shirt, but I was too aroused for that. I slid my panties down my legs and slid my bra off. I then crawled between the sheets and the soft sheets against my
Censored.
body seemed to amplify the sensitivity of my skin that was already on fire from the boy's attention.
This scene has been censored to provide a safe and enjoyable reading experience for everyone.
My alarm clock went off and I stiffly sat up. My whole body felt sore and I made myself get out of bed. I dragged myself to the bathroom and saw the gigantic knot on the top of my head. I sighed and covered it with my bangs. I didn't have to go to work for a while, and I was honestly wondering if I should even bother going in ever again. If Nico and Honey had been right, Mr. Wall Street had attempted to assault me. I didn't want to give him the chance to do it a second time. I made my way to the shower and took my time. I didn't have anything planned. No job. No life. I wandered out of the bathroom and felt a crushing sense of loneliness. I reached for my phone and dialed the one person who I knew I could trust to make it all better. "Hey, honey. It's been so long since you've called. Are you doing okay?" I didn't know how to answer her, and I felt a sob bubbling to the surface before I swallowed it back down. "I'm fine, Grandma. I've just been busy," I said, wiping at a tear that escaped. I hadn't even known that I had started crying. "You don't sound fine. You sound terrible, actually. Why don't I come for a visit?" My eyes widened in panic. "No," I said more strongly than I meant. "I mean, no, that's not necessary. Texas is so far." I groaned silently to myself. God, I felt like such a ditz for calling her. Of course, she would know something was wrong. She knew me better than anyone. "Well, if you don't want me to visit, then come visit me. I miss you so much, dear." Her voice cracked at the end of her statement and I tried my best to ignore it, but I couldn't. It hurt me that she was hurting for me. I felt like a crappy granddaughter. I sighed. What could it hurt to visit? Maybe going home, away from the craziness that had become my life, would be good for me. Before I could change my mind, I found myself saying, "I'll be on the next plane out." Chapter 4. I bought my ticket as soon as I hung up the phone. It didn't take long to pack. I had few clothes that would be appropriate for the Texas heat. I removed my contact lenses, given that it wasn't as if Winslow and Hollis couldn't find me. It wasn't until I was on my way leaving that I realized the bracelet that I always wore that belonged to my mother was missing. I knew I'd had it on before I left the bar the other night. I figured I lost it at Honey's. I shook my head, feeling like an idiot. I prayed to God it hadn't been stolen, as I dialed the club's number. No one answered, so I left a message. I had at least 6 hours to waste until my flight, and I figured I might as well tell my boss in person that I wasn't planning on coming back. But as soon as I stepped foot out of my door, I felt something wasn't right. I didn't know exactly what was wrong, but something just felt off. I tried not to think about it, as I made my way down the street with my backpack on my shoulders. But it felt as if someone was watching me. I told myself that it was probably just whomever Winslow and Hollis had hired. But that didn't stop me from walking quickly, covering the few blocks to the bar within record time. I opened the door to the bar and called out to my boss. I knew he lived just upstairs and spent most of the time in his office watching questionable movies on his computer. I knocked on his office door and he gruffly yelled out, "Who is it?" "It's me, Nia," I said, catching myself before I said Ivy. It's funny, just a few minutes with Winslow and Harry had made me start thinking of myself as Ivy again. I heard him get up and he made his way to the door, pulling it open just a tiny bit so that I could only see his face. "Nia, what are you doing here? Your shift doesn't start until tonight." You left something? I shook my head. No. Listen, I can't come in anymore. One of the regulars is starting to give me the creeps, so I think I have to find a new gig. He cut me off. God damn it. First Tori gets pregnant and leaves me to be a mom. He said this bitterly as if mom was a bad word before continuing, and now you're quitting on me. He shook his head. I stood there not saying a word. The old me would have blustered and made some excuse, and probably relented and would have kept on working. But the new me waited him out, knowing the person who broke the silence first was the person with the least power. I stood there unrelenting until he sighed and said, Fine. Let me pay you what I owe ya. Jesus, good help is hard to come by. I had a bounce in my step as I left the bar. I found myself excited about going home to Texas. I wasn't just going home out of misplaced guilt. I missed my grandmother. I missed being boring and normal. Life had been easier, not to mention safer that way. I was deep in thought when my cell phone rang, startling me in the process. I reached for it and automatically answered, not bothering to check to see who was calling. Hey girl, said a familiar voice that I immediately recognized. Hi Nico, I said warmly. Well, we got your message. I checked the bathroom and found your bracelet behind the toilet. You owe me, big little lady. I haven't been that close to the back of a toilet since I was a janitor at a high school to pay my way through law school. You're a lawyer? I said with surprise. One of the best divorce attorneys in the state, my dear. You wouldn't believe how many cheating husbands I've run into at the club. It's exhausting. They always start blubbering and trying to explain themselves. So pitiful. Anyway, I have your little bracelet. Well, Honey has it. She's working. Is Honey a lawyer too? Nico began to laugh really hard as if I told the funniest joke. Honey hates lawyers. She only tolerates me because I'm so cute. My smile widened. She's a retired police officer. You're kidding me. Nope. She found her true calling. Anyway, so Honey is expecting you sometime tonight. Whenever you get a chance to pop in. She's not performing tonight, so she'll be around circulating. Tonight? I was hoping sometime sooner. I gotta head out of town. Where are you now? I can call her up to see if she can meet up with you. I'm right down the street from the club. Okay, why don't you head that way and I'll give her a heads up. She won't appreciate you cutting into her precious yoga time, but considering the circumstances, I'm sure she'll forgive you. Thanks, Nico. I owe you one. Again. Anytime, girlfriend, and then he clicked off. I began to walk in the direction of the bar, glancing behind me again. I was still a little spooked after last night's encounter. The area where the bar and club were located was an industrial area being re-gentrified. The old warehouses were being turned into condos and lofts. They were being purchased surprisingly quickly by the young, upwardly mobile who couldn't afford to live in New York but held jobs in the city. There wasn't a lot of daytime activity, so I was alone yet again as I walked down the street. I was only a few doors down from the entrance to the club. I finally noticed there was a mural on the wall leading to the club's entrance. It was a funky little mural with a life-size painting of Honey looking very sexy surrounded by adoring men. I giggled and stopped to appreciate it. The next few moments will always haunt me, mostly because I never saw it coming. A car came roaring to a stop next to me, and before I could even turn around, arms like steel grabbed me from behind. I screamed and kicked, trying to break free from whomever had me. It was no use as he tossed me into the backseat of his car. As I struggled to sit up, I caught a glimpse of Honey through the back window. She was running behind the car as fast as she could, on bare feet. I screamed for her to help me, and then my entire world went black. Chapter 5. I woke up realizing that my body was being dragged across the floor. I didn't know where I was, and I immediately began to struggle against whomever was holding me. Abruptly, whoever it was stopped walking and viciously kicked me in the side. I gasped at the pain and turned away from the next blow that caught me close to my ribs. I couldn't breathe from the pain. I could only lay there and moan, attempting to shield myself from the next blow. I felt the person who kicked me drag me up by my hair. He then slammed me against the wall. I slid down the wall in too much pain to do anything. Breathing was a difficult task, let alone trying to defend myself. Easy, easy, Pinky. Miss Nia is our guest. Let's not kill her. At least not yet, came a voice from down the hall. I looked around and finally realized that I was in someone's home. Well, not just anyone's home, but Mr. Wall Street himself. He was looking down at me with a smile on his face. Hi, Nia. Welcome to my summer home. I hope you like it. He then kneeled down in front of me and traced a hand down my face. I recoiled away from his hand, my teeth now chattering with fear. What are you doing? What are you going to do to me? I said, choking back a sob. Oh, come now, Nia. You were so tough in the bar the other day, so cold. I found it unbelievably sexy, by the way. He paused and began to stroke my hair, gently at first. And then unexpectedly, he wound his hand into my hair, gripped a chunk of it, and snatched my face towards his. I grimaced and tried to pull away. He responded by roughly slapping me across the face with his free hand. When I cried out, he laughed. I vowed in that moment to never give him the pleasure of hearing me cry out again. You're so haughty. You think you're better than me or something. I can have any girl I want, Nia. You should have been honored that I even paid attention to you. You, a nobody working in a seedy bar. I stared into his eyes and finally saw what repelled me. It was something about his eyes. Madness. That's what they reflected. His eyes were expressionless and empty, as if he didn't have a soul. He was insane, clearly. He wasn't just an arrogant, rich boy. No, this man had no scruples because he had no moral compass. It was hard to have a moral compass when you didn't have a soul, apparently. I stayed quiet, too scared to speak. I felt anything I said would be taken as a personal affront, which would lead to more abuse. I wasn't sure how much more I could take. My body hurt so much that I felt the need to throw up, and honestly staying conscious was a struggle. I felt my body slumping forward, and this time Pinky slapped me across the face, preventing me from slipping into unconsciousness. The boss is still talking. Pay attention. It's okay, Pinky. I have plenty of time to get better acquainted with Ms. Nia. He then smirked as he said, she won't have any questionable characters in drag defending her this time. Oh, and by the way, he smiled sickly at me and punched me in my stomach. I crumpled to a ball on the floor. That was for the bathroom incident in the club. I groaned as I tried to sit back up, holding my stomach. Mr. Wall Street winked at me, stood up and walked away. Pinky continued dragging me across the floor. I realized that it was covered in a plush area rug. I attempted to look around, although I felt my face starting to swell. I was in what appeared to be a mansion. I wondered how long I had been missing, and if Honey knew in what direction they had taken me. I prayed that she did. I didn't get a chance to continue that line of thought, as Pinky shoved me into a room and slammed the door. I heard him lock it from the outside. I sat there for a second and took in my surroundings. My head was killing me, but I forced myself to focus. I realized that I was in a bedroom. I slowly stood up and went to the windows. They were barred. What type of mansion was this? I looked around for something to defend myself with for when Pinky came back. There weren't any lamps. There was just a mirror on a side wall and a large bed in the middle of the room. I began to pace up and down the room, trying to figure out what to do. I was afraid for my life, but I needed to think. I needed to come up with a plan. I spotted a little camera in the far left corner and pretended I didn't see it. No matter what I did, it would have to be pretty stealth, I thought with a sigh. Apparently, I was being watched. I was imprisoned in a mansion, locked in a room with a bed covered in ridiculously fluffy pillows. What was I supposed to do? Beat Pinky away with a pillow when he came back? A hysterical giggle forced itself out of my mouth. For some reason, I couldn't stop them, and I began to laugh hard, hysterically. First, I'm almost kidnapped, then I find out the man, or rather men of my dreams were bears, and now I'm kidnapped by a loser in a $10,000 suit. My life freaking sucked. I laughed until my giggles turned into sobs, and I fell down to the floor with my back to the wall. I pulled my knees up to my
censored
and continued to sob until I was dry heaving and I had no more tears to shed. I gulped and looked around as I heard a hissing sound, like a gas leak. It sounded like vents were opening, and before I knew it, I could no longer keep my eyes open, and I found myself falling into a deep sleep. I figured as I stared Mr. Wall Street down that they had knocked me out with some sort of gas before tying me up to the chair I currently found myself on. My wrists hurt. Who was I kidding? My whole body hurt, but none of that mattered anymore as I smiled as Mr. Wall Street brought back his hand to strike me again. He stopped and seemed confused by my smile. "What are you smiling about?" he asked, clearly disconcerted. "I would run if I were you," I mumbled and then spit on the floor, clearing my mouth of the blood that pooled there. "Run?" He laughed. "From you?" He looked at Pinky, who smiled at him in amusement. "No. It's not me that you have to be afraid of." "Oh, really? Then who should I be afraid of?" Mr. Wall Street said, playing along. "This is amusing, isn't it, Pinky?" Pinky grunted, but looked perturbed when he heard the dogs barking in the distance. "I'll be back. I need to check out why the dogs are barking." He then disappeared out the door. "You must be such a stud if you have to kidnap a woman to get her attention," I teased. His face hardened. "I take what I want. I'm a man of action." I smirked. "You're like a toddler who had a tantrum. Can't get what you want, so you forcefully take it." I tilted my head to the side and said, "It must be tough being so emotionally stunted that you have to hurt people to get off." "Shut up." "Oh, poor baby," I said, faking sympathy. "Are you going to cry now? Did I guess right? I bet you're even impotent too. What are you packing in those pants of yours? An inchworm?" He grabbed me by my neck then, and began to strangle me. I tried my best to get away from him, and eventually fell over in the chair. He stood above me with a look of fury on his face, and as he raised his leg to stomp me, the door flew open courtesy of Pinky's body that went flying through it. Pinky attempted to sit up, and realized belatedly that his arms were no longer attached to his body. Mr. Wall Street stared at his friend, and then his eyes widened as he saw the creature standing there in the hall. He backed up slowly, shaking his head no. The bear-like creature snarled and raised up on its hind legs. It eerily walked over to Mr. Wall Street and lowered its head to his face. I saw liquid pool around Mr. Wall Street's feet and realized that he had peed himself. And then his eyes widened even more as a second snarling creature appeared at the door. This one approached me on all fours and easily cut away the ropes that bound my wrists with its razor-sharp nails. It then nudged me towards the door. Mr. Wall Street was shaking as both creatures began to pace around him. I turned my head away, knowing what would happen next. I walked as quickly as my tired legs would carry me out of the room and down the stairs. I could hear the screams of Mr. Wall Street as they echoed across the house. They went from screams of fear to screams of pain, and then finally there was silence. I pushed through his front door, and finally my legs gave out on me. Someone caught me in their arms. It was Honey. I instantly began to sob. "It's okay, love. We got you. We got you. It's okay. The nightmare's over. It's okay," she said as she hugged me to her
censored
and rocked me like a child. Epilogue. "Girl, I almost forgot to give this to you," Nico said, reaching into his pocket and handing me my bracelet. My eyes grew wide and I felt tears forming. "Oh my gosh, I almost forgot completely." "Thank you so much," I said, hugging Nico tightly. He hugged me back briefly and then let me go. "You're welcome, babe. Now, if you don't mind, we need to get these drinks out to our guests before we have a riot on our hands." Our guests were my grandmother, her fiancé, Honey, Winslow, and Hollis. I doubt any of them would riot, but I humored Nico and followed him outside. It was a beautiful fall day, and although there was a chill in the air, I didn't care. I was feeling good. The most important people in my life were here. We were having dinner at Hollis house, which was a town home with 3 floors in an affluent area of town. I placed the drinks in the middle of the table, and to my surprise, Grandma was the first person to reach for one. Her fiancé, Mr. Davis, reached for a drink as well, and they clinked their glasses together. With a giggle, my grandmother batted her eyelashes at Mr. Davis and sent him a meaningful look. I blushed and turned away, pretending I hadn't noticed. Honey wasn't so shy. "Wow, you two. Get a room." Grandma smiled widely, and Mr. Davis had the grace to look embarrassed. "They're obviously in love, honey." "Leave them alone," Nico said, swatting at Honey's arm. He sat down next to Honey and took a long sip from his drink. He popped his lips together afterwards and said, "God damn, that's delicious." I giggled. Nico and Honey had become my best friends after the ordeal that happened nearly 6 months ago. In fact, if it hadn't been for Honey, who used her police connections, I probably would have been dead before they found me. Immediately after I had been kidnapped, she had called it in. And Nico had been the one to contact Hollis. It turned out that Nico realized that he and Hollis had attended law school together after he dropped me off that night. He hadn't realized it at first, but something about Hollis had bothered him, and so he had looked him up and realized that they actually did know each other. From there, they had combined resources with the cops, but of course Hollis and Winslow had arrived first and dealt with Mr. Wall Street, who I later found out was named Clint Maryland. He wasn't even affiliated with Wall Street. He was actually a well-known psychiatrist, and most of his clients were affiliated with the mafia. Pinky, for instance, was a retired hitman. I heard Pinky was serving 10 to 15 years. And Clint, well, when the police got there wasn't much left of him to arrest, and Pinky's blubbering about Werbears made him not such a reliable source regarding what had happened that day. Winslow and Hollis had disappeared before the cops got to the scene. I claimed that I didn't see what happened to Clint, since I was too busy trying to escape. Luckily that had been true, although I knew very well what Clint's fate had been. Ever since that day, I had made myself a home at Nico's apartment. He had a spare bedroom, and since he worked so much during the day and was a DJ by night, he was never home, so it was like having an entire luxury apartment to myself. I even helped myself to all his toiletries, which felt and smelled amazing and must have cost a small fortune. Honey came over to take care of me, and of course the guys and Grandma had been there for my recovery too. The physical wounds had healed, but emotionally I wasn't quite back to normal, but the psychologist I saw said that it would take some time. Nico made a great roommate, and between him and Honey, they kept me laughing and happy. In fact, I was extremely happy and grateful for these people around me and for my life in general. I even got a job. I started working for an online-based nonprofit whose CEO was a client of Nico's. I did all their blog posts, social media marketing, newsletters, and everything else they needed. I loved it. I felt my life was complete. After my grandmother and Mr. Davis went back to their hotel, Nico and Honey left shortly thereafter. I suspected my grandmother picked up on the fact that both men were interested in me, but she didn't comment. For that, I was relieved. Not that I felt guilty about my relationship with Winslow and Hollis. I didn't. I loved them both. There was no denying that, but it was complicated. I couldn't choose one or the other. They were both integral parts of my life. They loved me hard, and I loved them harder. As they cleaned up the kitchen, I decided to shower in Hollis' guest room. I stripped quickly and stepped in. The bathroom was huge and had a large walk-in shower that was almost as big as my closet. I sighed and placed my hands against the walls of the shower, letting the pressure of the water beat against my shoulders. I then closed my eyes and wound my fingers through my hair, gathering it at the nape of my neck. I let the pressure of the shower beat against my face this time, and was startled when I felt hands caress my shoulders.
This scene has been censored to provide a safe and enjoyable reading experience for everyone.
He got out the shower first and held a towel out for me. I stepped into it, and he gently began to dry my body, caressing it again, arousing me further. I moved to
censored,
him and he,
censored.
me back and then broke off abruptly saying, Hollis is getting jealous, I'll see you in the morning, love. I was confused by his words, and as he exited the bathroom in full nudity, I couldn't help but admire his taut,
censored.
Your loss. I shouted behind him and I heard him laugh. I smiled to myself as I finished drying off and made my way into the bedroom. Hollis sat on the bed, looking annoyed. Oh, now I get it, I said, noting his look.
This scene has been censored to provide a safe and enjoyable reading experience for everyone.
Thank you for reading my book. If you like this story, I think you'll enjoy my book. Get a copy of Cain now, free. A big favor to ask. I would really love it if you could take a few seconds to leave me a review. Thank you so much in advance. About the author. Selina Coffey is a romance writer who lives happily in London with her husband and son. She is a hopeless romantic who grew up always believing in love, and she is not ashamed to admit this. It is this belief that makes her so passionate about writing crazy love stories. A stereotypical girly girl, she loves shopping. So whenever she gets a chance and the spare cash, you will probably find her browsing online for the next pair of shoes to add to her collection. You can find her online at www.selinacoffee.com. Contact her at hello@selinacoffee.com. Closing credits. This has been Barely Over. Written by Selina Coffey. Auto-narrated using Google technology. Copyright 2024 by Lovie Books Limited. Production copyright 2024 by Lovie Books Limited.